and deeper into this relationship with you. So God, would you help us to trust you more and more, to point everything that you've blessed us with back at you, God, for your glory, for your honor. Help us to follow your generosity, God, your joy, your love. God, we love you and we praise you in this place, God, in our homes, wherever we are. We pray this in your mighty name. Amen.
Good morning to you out there in your homes. I'm glad to be with you. Thanks to Pastor Nate for inviting me to come and teach this morning. We're going to talk about the family a little bit today. And the title of today's message is The Parent's Priority. Now, I think that all of you would agree with me that it is not for wimps that they should become parents. Okay? The only people that find parenting easy are the people who have never had children. I come from a family where my daughter got married, she had a child. My son was still single, and he thought that parenting was the easiest thing in the world, gave tons of parenting advice to my daughter. And then later, he got married, several years later, he got married, and all of a sudden, parenting was not the easy thing that he thought it was. And we learned by experience. And so if you agree with me this morning that parenting is not for wimps, I'm glad you're here. Because today we're going to talk about the parent's priority. Now, there's probably no more difficult time of raising children than when they become teenagers. And you would agree with me there if you have teenagers. If you don't agree with me, it's because you haven't had teenagers. But teenage years are the most difficult probably to navigate as a parent. Now, I've learned through life that there are scary times. I remember coming into my family room one time, and my daughter's watching this, we'll call it a reality TV show. And this reality TV show, it had a lady, I'm just going to tell you who it was. It was Jessica Simpson and her husband at the time, Nick Lachey. And she's in the living room, no, she's actually in the kitchen, and she's holding this can of chicken of the sea tuna. And she looks at her husband and she says, "Now, Nick, I know it's tuna, but is it chicken or fish?" And I looked at my daughter with alarm in my face and thought, "Honey, you're just going to get dumber watching this." And I knew in the teenage years that it's going to be difficult to navigate, and I'm going to tell you that I kind of agree with Mark Twain. Mark Twain said this. He says, when a child turns 13, you need to put them in a barrel, nail the lid shut, and feed them through a knothole. When they turn 16, you need to plug the knothole. Now, that's probably not the best parenting advice you're going to get today, and I hope it is not. But the truth of the matter is that parenting is not for wimps, and we want to establish that right up front. So let's start today with what a parent's priority really is. What is the goal of being a parent? A lot of times we think, well, I want to raise my kid as best I can. But without a specific goal in mind, sometimes that goes by the wayside and we wander through life. And so today I want to give it to you right here real succinctly, and you're going to say, boy, I've got the message, I can tune out. But stick around because we have more to come. A parent's priority is to gradually transfer a child's dependence away from them until it rests solely on God. Transferring a child's dependence. Now, I've had friends who are parents, and they love the fact that they're parents. They love the fact that their child depends on them. It makes them feel needed. It makes them feel fulfilled. And I have one particular lady friend who, even as her children became adults, they would come to visit her at her home. And then as they would leave with their family, they had children, they would leave and she would tell them, "I want you to call me when you get home so I know you're safe." Now, I think that's kind of endearing and kind of thoughtful. But the reality of it is that she knew that she wanted her children to remain dependent on her. And she was scared to death that she could release them to anyone else. Now, I want you to know that your goal as a parent is to transfer your child's dependence from you until it rests solely on God. Now, we're going to take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 today, and we're going to get some scriptural advice, probably one of the greatest texts in the Old Testament about being a parent. Now, we have to take into context what Deuteronomy chapter 6 is. And if you've ever been a part of my church or ever been a part of my teaching, when I ask what the context is, you're going to probably scratch your head and say, "Oh, no, I don't know." Well, I want you to know that if you can do math, you can figure out the context. The context of Deuteronomy chapter 6 is Deuteronomy chapter 5. It's easy. Now, you're theologians today, and so therefore, if you want to know what happens in chapter 6, look back at chapter 5 and take a look at it in its whole. Now, the truth of the matter is that in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, we find the 10 Commandments. God describes to his people how they can best relate to him, and he gives them 10 commandments. And we could talk about the 10 commandments probably for the rest of the morning, but we're not. He gives them direction on how best to relate to him. Now, as they do that, he comes to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now, he teaches how to relate to God. Now he's going to teach parents how to relate to your children. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we find some of the greatest advice we could ever find for finding out how to be a good parent. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, this is what Moses writes. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess. Now, they're getting ready to start a whole new life, a whole new career, a whole new nation. They're getting ready to go into a land where God has promised them that they would find a land flowing with milk and honey. Everything they needed for existence was already going to be provided for them. They wouldn't have to build houses. They wouldn't have to grow crops. They wouldn't have to obtain herds. It was already going to be there, already for them for the taking. All they had to do is follow God, follow his commands, and take possession of the land. And so he's going to give that to them. So he gives them these laws, decrees, and rules that they're going to use now to relate to him and to live in the land God has promised to give them. So he goes on and he says this, so that you, your children, and their children. Now, he's given a command here. He's giving some instructions on how not only can you affect your life, but you're going to affect your children's life and successive generations. If you want to have generational impact, this is the message for you, because you can learn to do two things we're going to learn today, two things that you pass on to your children who will pass on generationally those things, and we will build a structure through which faith can be passed on, where faith can be observed, where faith can be lived for future generations. And I'm going to back up a little bit and catch this on the run, so that you, your children, and their children after them may do a couple of things. Number one, fear the Lord your God as long as you live, and so that you may enjoy long life. Okay? Long life, fearing the Lord their God. Now, I always like talking about fearing God, because I always ask people, do you think you should be scared of God? Do you think you should be afraid of God? And to a person, if you ask Christians, they will often say, absolutely not. We should never fear. He loves us. He wants the best for us. He absolutely does. But I do believe there's an element of fear, actual fear of God, that we need to have in order to have a proper, appropriate regard for who he truly is. And that's what fear of God really is all about. Now, I want you to be afraid of God anytime that you're on the wrong side of him. I think we ought to be afraid of hell, for example. And if I have a potential of going to hell, I want to be afraid of that, and I want to reverence God. I want to reverence him, and I want to adhere to him, and I want to cling to him. I want to follow what he has to say for my life. Therefore, there's this actual element of being scared a little bit of being on the wrong side of God. And so therefore we have this balance that we have to maintain in order to say, okay, I want to be on the right side of God and experience his love, his compassion, his mercy, his grace, all of the attributes that God has, so that we can be on the right side of things, so that we can have proper relationship with him. Now, as parents, we have to realize that we have some power over our children. And a lot of times, I think in today's generation, we have this idea that we will let our children grow up and decide for themselves certain things. We'll let them decide for themselves. I remember my children growing up, I never gave them the option, hey, kids, do you want to go to school today or not? I knew what the answer would be. No. Hey, kids, what do you want to have for breakfast? Do you want to have Oreos or do you want to have bacon and eggs? Oh, and I have to admit to you, as a parent, I remember one day getting up late and having to get my kids off to school, and I did feed them Oreos for breakfast. It was the fastest thing in the world. So don't take that bit of advice, but be sure that you have the time and energy and effort spent properly for your kids. Now, kids in my generation, when I was growing my family, they didn't have options about certain things. They did have some options so that they could learn to make good decisions. I wanted them to learn by their failure, but there were some things that I did not want them to fail at. One of those things was I didn't want teenage pregnancy in my house. I didn't want my son nor my daughter to experience that. I would have gone to the wall to protect them from that. I would have gone to the greatest extents to protect them from that. There was another thing. I did not want them to experience drugs. And so I would have gone to the wall. I would have gone and captured them and drug them home. I would have done whatever I needed to do to protect them from that. But there were some things that it was okay for them to learn by mistakes. And so therefore they could learn from their mistakes, make better decisions down the road. Now, for you and your family, you have to decide what things are the inviolable, non-negotiables that you will not allow your children to overstep, and what are some areas that they can learn to make mistakes in, because that's where they truly learn decision-making processes. Now, as we get ready to pass on to our children a couple of things, let me make sure that you understand that what you pass on, you must possess. You cannot give away what you do not have. And so therefore, this message is really for parents to first obtain and then pass on. And so today I want to mark out two things that I want you to have for your children. Number one, I want you to give them a true love of God. Okay? Teach them to love their God. You can only teach them to love their God by learning to love your God. I remember I was at a wedding one time that I'd performed, and one of our church members came up to me and kind of pulled up her chair kind of in the corner where we were. And she says, Pastor Mike, I need to tell you something. I said, oh, okay, go ahead. And she said, I'm just having a hard time loving God. I said, really? What is it that constitutes your love for God? What are the things that make up your love for God? And she had this warm, fuzzy feeling, you know. She said, I have a hard time having the warm, fuzzy feeling with a God that I've never seen, I've never, really had much contact with, and never really that I can't touch. I said, well, let me give you a couple of reasons to love God and a couple of ways to love God. Number one, remember from where you have come. And I think a lot of times we gloss over our former life and maybe even put it away. We don't regard it very highly. But if you're struggling with love for God, remember your former life before you came to know Jesus. And that life was characterized by sinfulness. And when we came to know Christ, we came to know him through forgiveness. He said, I'm not going to hold that stuff against you any longer. I'm not going to count that against you. And I'll tell you, when I came to know Christ, I came to know Christ as a young kid, but I remember that time that I came to know him, it was as if I was floating. When I gave my life to him, I was floating. My grandfather came into my bedroom that night, and he was talking to me, and he says, Mike, how do you feel? I said, man, I feel like I'm floating on air. I feel like if you took these covers off of me, that I would float to the ceiling. He says, you know why that is? I said, I have no idea. He says, this is the first time you've ever experienced life without the weight of sin pulling you down. I thought, man, what a great picture that is. What a great picture. And from that point forward, I've always been able to look back on that time and realize, my God loved me so much that he relieved all of that weight and that burden of sin that I carried with me for so long. And I love him for that. I love him because he took that away from me, and I live life in a far different plane now. And so remember, if you're having a struggle with God, remember, and you might want to make a list of all of the things that you did. Man, I deserved punishment for that. God gave me grace. I deserved death for this. God gave me grace. God gave me mercy. And those two words, if you always go back to those two words, you'll be able to enhance your love for God. Number one is the grace of God. He gives you things that you don't deserve, that you didn't merit. He gives them to you. He gives you good life. And he also withholds some things that you do deserve. That's mercy. He withholds the punishment that we deserve for all the wrong that we've done. So if I've struggled with this love for God, I always go back to those two things, the grace and mercy of God that removed the weight of sin and caused me to feel like I could float as a kid. I think that's something that's worthwhile. And I think that's something that we need to experience before we export that to our children. Now, where do we get this whole love God from? Well, there's a passage here in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's called the Hebrew Shema. And the Shema says that we're going to love God. And it says it with very certain specifics. And the Hebrew people would recite this Shema 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, so that it would become so entrenched in their minds that they didn't have to worry about well, what am I going to do? How am I going to love God? And here's what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 5. It says this, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." We are a monotheistic system is what the Hebrews were saying. Monotheistic, one God. The Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Love God three ways, with all of your heart. Now, this word heart is a kind of an interesting word because the word heart in the Old Testament doesn't just refer to how you feel, but it has to do with your mind controlling how you feel, which helps you decide what to do. So your mind, your will, and your emotions all kind of compact here in this word heart. Now, I don't know about you, but I do know me. And I usually do the things I feel like doing. Much to my chagrin sometimes. I do what I feel like doing. Now, if I have believed right in my mind, I will always feel properly toward whatever it is that I'm deciding, and then I will decide right. Okay? Follow me. If you believe today that I'm here as a guest preacher in your church, and all I'm here for is to take the offering, okay? Now, here at Home Church, we're going to have a difficult time doing that, I know. But let's say that that's what you believe, that all I'm here for is money. How do you feel about me? You feel like he's a charlatan. I don't know that I can trust what he says. He might just manipulate me to give money, okay? And then what will you decide to do? I'm not giving him anything. I'm not giving the church anything. I think that they're just after my money. Okay, now, if you believe that, you decide differently than if you believe, well, you know, Pastor Nate is the greatest pastor in the world. We have the greatest church in the world. And man, he is here for my good. What do you believe? Okay, you believe he's here for good. You believe that his message is for your benefit, and you will thrive by abiding by it. And you will then do what? I'll give to that cause because I really believe in it. See, your belief system determines how you end up acting. So make sure you believe right. So love the Lord your God with all of your what? All of your heart. All of your heart. Think right about God, feel right about God, believe right about God, or do right about God. I got a phone call just yesterday from a guy whose mother, she was in her mid-50s, she died of brain cancer. Tragedy. And he says, Pastor Mike, I want to let you know that I'm having a hard time with God. I'm really mad at God. And I said, I stopped right there because I know where this is going. And I said, I believe every person should be mad at God when he doesn't keep his promises. Now, what did he promise you that he didn't keep? There was silence. There was silence. He goes, well, nothing really. I said, yeah, because God has not promised to give us life on this earth for eternity, right? And it would be a bad God who would do that because God wants us to be relieved from this existence in a sinful world. He wants us to be with him in heaven. And man, what a bad God it would be if he just made us live here forever. Your mom has been rescued. And man, his whole attitude toward God changed when he believed the truth about God because it made him feel different about God, and then he acted different about God. He said that he had this cross that he had been wearing, and on it is inscribed the Lord's Prayer, and he'd worn it. Man, it helped him, really connect with God. And he said, when my mom died, I took it off. I decided God was bad. Now that he believes right about God, I said, put that cross back on. He says, I will. And now he wears the cross. Now, for you, if you believe right about God, you feel right about God, you do right with God. So believe God, okay, and trust him with all of your heart. Love him with all of your heart. Now, trust him with all of your soul as well. Now, that soul is that part of you that's going to live forever. You know, we have our mind, our will, our emotions, we have our body, and those things are going to pass away. When we pass from this earth, they will be gone. But our soul will live forever. So we don't love God just for our lifetime. We love God for eternity. When we get to be with him in heaven, we're going to find that things are much, much better, much, much easier to love God. So love him with all of your strength is the third way. Love God with all of your strength. Now, loving God takes effort. It's not something that just happens. I know when I got married to my wife, Cindy, it was easy to love her because she's lovable. She is lovely. And it was easy to love her. Now, on the converse of that, I'm not so lovable. I'm not so lovely. And it was difficult for her. I'm making this up. But it was much more difficult for her to love me, I think, than for me to love her, because she had to make a decision to love me. This is the man God has given me. This is the man God has placed in my life. This is the man that's going to father my children. This is the man that's going to lead our family. This is the man, I love him. And she has loved me much better than I deserve to be loved. Now, when we love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that's something we can pass on to our children. But there's something that often gets in the way of that. And it's what we want for our children. I think it's pretty common for parents to want more for their children than they have gotten themselves. You know, I remember my parents growing up during the Depression. They wanted a life for me that didn't have to struggle with food, didn't have to struggle with stuff. And they did a lot of things. They saved rubber bands off the newspaper. That's back in the days where you got newspapers thrown in your yard. And they would take I know, some people are out there right now saying, newspapers, what's that? But they had actually printed newspapers they'd thrown in your yard. You get the rubber band, and they put it on the front doorknob. We had, 100 rubber bands on the doorknob, so that if you ever needed one, you could go get one. Well, by the time you'd go get one of those rubber bands that had been laying in the yard and on your doorknob for a couple of months, they were always cracked. They were no good. But my parents were that way. They wanted better for me than they had for themselves, and they were willing to sacrifice in order to do it. Now, what do we want for our children? What do we want for our children that's better than what we had? Well, I'm going to suggest that we want some things for our children. We want our kids to have great health. I think our kids should have great health. And so therefore, we need to protect them. We need to feed them. We need to do all of that stuff. And so what does that take? Have you ever tried to eat healthy? Say yes with me. You know, we go through these phases at our house every once in a while where we're going to be healthy. We're going to get organic stuff, and we're going to do this. But it's expensive. It's much more expensive to eat healthy than it is to eat junky. And so therefore, I'm an advocate of junky, but we really should eat healthy. But it's more expensive. What do you have to do if it's more expensive? You have to work more. You have to work more. You have to work longer. You're away from your family longer. And it might, heaven forbid, might be an opportunity for me to work on Sunday. And so maybe I'll miss church, but man, it's for my family. I want my kids to do well. I want them to be well connected with their friends. I want them to be involved in soccer. I want them to be involved in youth football. I want them to be involved in dance. I want them to be involved in all of this stuff. And so you know what that takes? It takes a minivan. It takes a minivan, and I got to get a minivan, so I got to work more. And then I get a minivan, and somebody's got to take these kids to all these places. And gee, what happens if we have a Little League game on Sunday? I remember when my parents were raising me, I was involved in Little League, and my parents realized that the last season that I was going to be involved in Little League was going to be a season in which they started playing on Sundays. First time ever. Going to play on Sundays. My parents said, no, we go to church. And so my dad ran. I remember this. I'm an 11-year-old kid, and I remember my dad running to be the president of the Little League. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Well, when I became a parent and I got my son involved in Little League, I realized that the person who becomes president is a guy who doesn't have the ability to say no. Because nobody wants to be president. Nobody wants that job. And I thought, but at the time, I thought, man, my dad ran to be president. He's president of the Little League, man. And my mom and dad spent days configuring schedules so that we wouldn't have to play on Sundays. And they got it done because they believed it was valuable for me to be in church on Sundays. And I remember being the general of the Sunday school. Back in that day, we got a little awards for perfect attendance. And if you got a 3-month award pin and a 6-month award pin, a 9-month award pin, and then a year award pin, it was an awesome one. It was white enamel with red cross and blue stuff on it. And then they started the second year, you got a wreath around it. And man, that was awesome. And then they started hanging bars on it. 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, 7th year. My mom still has that pin in a frame on her wall. I was the only one in my entire family of 4, though, that had perfect attendance for 7 years. I couldn't figure that out. I still can't figure it out. But I was the general of the Sunday school because my parents thought it was important for me to be in school, not playing Little League, not doing all kinds of stuff. But we want some things for our kids. And so when you get ready to have children, make a list of what you want for your children. Make sure that number 1 on the list is love your God. Now, I'm going to give you some real quick statistics here. If mom and dad went to church 72% of kids will attend as adults. If mom and dad both go to church. Now, this is just church attendance. This is a far cry. Attending church is a far cry from loving God, I want you to know. But this is the statistics we have. If mom only went to church, single moms, I want you to know I love you. And you do a stellar job. You make more sacrifice than anybody on this earth, I want you to know. However, when it comes to kids attending church, if only mom goes to church, only 15% of kids will attend as adults. 15%. If dad, however, is the only one who went to church, notice the statistics. 55% of kids will as adults. Dads, you have more impact on your kids going to church than mom does. Now, mom can drag them, she can make them go, but when they become adults and they make their own decision, that's when the proof is in the pudding. So therefore, dads, accept your responsibility. Teach your kids to love God by bringing them to church. Don't make church attendance a punishment. Don't make church attendance something that's pitiful to do, but make sure that they're learning to love God in the attendance of church. Now, if neither mom nor dad go to church, only 5% of kids will as adults. Now, I'm not talking about showing up for an hour on Sunday, listening to a message, singing some songs, and going home. I'm talking about having a vibrant relationship with God through a love for Him that will never, ever, ever, ever die. So, here's the question for you. Do you love God with all of your heart or with some of your heart? Because the instruction is, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your strength. Make sure you love Him with all of that. Now, number two, the second thing that I want you to have and export to your family is an ability to lead your family. Dads, especially, I want you to lead your family. Find it in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. It says this, these commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts, that's your mind, will, and emotions. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk on the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your door frames and on your houses and on your gates. Now, I like what Edward, Duke of Windsor said here. He says this, the thing that impresses me most about America is the way the parents obey their children. Yikes, what a scathing documentary on us. Now, we need to learn to lead our families. Learn to lead your family. I remember my kids, when they were young, we really taught them our goal was to teach them to love God, not just to go to church, but to love God. And we were at home one day, and the kids and I were at home, and my wife was at work, and we decided we were going to get on our bikes, take a blanket over to the park, and have lunch. So we got our blankets, got our bikes, and we started trudging off. And just before we left the house, my daughter Jenny said, hey, Dad, how about if we take the Bible and we read some Bible stories? I said, awesome. And so we did that because she was already at a young age learning to love God. Jared came along, man, we got out there and we got on the blanket. We read Bible stories. We ate lunch. We played in the park. We packed it up. We went home. A couple of days later, I'm driving in the car and I've got the kids in the back seat. We're driving along and somebody cut me off. Hate to admit it to you guys because you don't know me from anybody, but I used a word that I should not have used to describe the driver of the car that cut me off. It starts with an I and ends with diet. Okay? And I called him that, call him an idiot. And I go, you idiot. And my daughter from the back seat, once again, especially tuned to love God, she speaks up and she says, yeah, Dad, we should invite him to church. Oh, yeah. Well, we can't catch up with him now. But man, that's good. We'll do that next time. And our kids, sometimes when we teach them to love God, they will hold us accountable to love God. Be prepared. Don't slough that off. Don't poo-poo it as just children's play. That's God reminding you that you cannot export what you do not have. And so therefore, make sure that you lead your family. Now, I want you to lead intentionally. A lot of leadership in family happens as a result of what? Oh no, we have a crisis. We have to do something. And so we lead by crisis management. I want you to have a plan for your kids. I want you to plan to raise your kids to love Him, to love God, and to learn to lead intentionally. So as we learn to lead intentionally, there are several things here. Let me just read to you Proverbs 22:6, because we need to train our children in the way they should go. And it says simply this: train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now that word train is a Hebrew word which means to initiate, to dedicate, to train. So be an initiator of the training. Don't be a responder to situations, but be an initiator of training children to love God and learn to lead. Now I've listed here on the outline that you don't have at home, so you might want to jot some of these down or ask Pastor Nate to get you a copy. Okay? It says this, 7 things that we need to learn to train our kids from Proverbs. Number 1, train them to manage God's money. Okay, train them to manage. You know why you need to train them to manage God's money? Initially, when I say that, most people say, yeah, so they'll give to the church. And I want you not to do that. I want you to train them to manage God's money by giving it elsewhere, maybe. Or finding people that you can be generous with, because that's another thing you need to teach them, generosity. I remember my son and I were at Walmart one day, and we're in line, and I noticed that ahead of us there's this lady, and she's having a conversation with the cashier, and she says, I don't have it. And I perked up. I said, oh, can I help here? What do you need? She said, oh, I opened my wallet and I don't have any money. I can't pay. I said, I'll pay for you. And it was like $50. It was not a big deal. And she's finding things to take away. I said, no, we'll pay for everything. And my son and I paid for her groceries that day. And it was one of the most liberating experiences you'll ever have, because the greatest antidote to materialism is generosity. Learning that God will supply the things that we need in order to give away. So let me hurry along here. Okay, so train them to manage God's money. Train them to carefully select their friends. Teach them what to look for in character so that they can pick friends that are good for them. The Bible is very clear. We ought to have friends that we can share Christ with. They're going to be far from God. Make sure that we're influencing them and not vice versa, them influencing us. In 1 Corinthians, it says bad company does what? Corrupts good morals. So be careful making sure that the influence goes one way only. Okay? Now, train them to watch their words. Teach them honesty. Teach them when they say something that they will follow up and they will do it. Number 4, train them to be responsible. Responsible. You have to take care of your business. Okay? Number 5, train them to guard their minds. Make sure that what goes in your mind is good and profitable for you, to keep the junk out. Okay? Train them to be generous. We talked about that already. And then train them to fear God. Train them to love Him with this reverential respect that says, I trust you with everything that I am and everything that I have. So here's the question for you. Are you leading your children, or are your children leading you? So today, I want you to make a commitment, and I want to lead you in a word of prayer that we can train our children to love God and to be leaders in their community. Father, I bow before you today, and I'm thankful for what you do. I'm thankful for the word you give us. Thank you for what you teach us. And so, Lord, today, we ask that you would empower us, that you would give us vision for what you want us to become so that we can export that not only to our children, but to our neighborhoods, to our workplace, to our families. Lord, we love you today, and we want to learn to love you better. We want to love you with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength. And so, Lord, today, we give ourselves to you to be used by you. For it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.